and want to welcome Dr. Linden West, who's Professor Emeritus at Canterbury Christ Church University. Linden was formerly Professor of Education, Reader and Principal Lecturer. He is a very celebrated author and researcher in the field of lifelong learning, adult and higher education. And his work's been very influential on my own, I must say. Colin Kirkwood is a psychoanalytic psychotherapist who's had a lifelong involvement in adult education and community action. And he takes a very personalist view in relation to his approach, which he describes as dialogical, relational psychotherapy. He was a senior lecturer in counselling studies at the University of Edinburgh for 10 years and focused on dialogue between psychodynamic perspectives and the person-centered approach. And I'm going to switch off now and hand over to our two colleagues. Many thanks.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Ian, and hello, everybody. This will be dialogical. Lots of material, but we'll try honestly to stick to time. Let me just kind of revisit what I see to be the central themes. You've covered some of this, but certainly this will inform the dialogue that Colin and I will have. And there are a number of things. The first is the crises of democracy, representative democracy, participative democracy. It's not working very well. Alongside that is the rise of authoritarianism that seems to increasingly be rampant. The fracturing of dialogue maybe is another concern, and most obviously may be illustrated in what's happening on social media. A second concern or theme is what we might call a growing recognition of the failure of over-centralized states and mentalities. We at the center know best. And even those who are politically involved at the center of things, like a shadow spokesman for communities in the British system, Lisa Nandy, she talks in her book All In of how local communities must fight resistance and create and launch creative campaigns against distant companies, institutions, and government. We hear the slogan, power to the people, but what precisely that means and how that general aspiration is translated out into particulars is another matter. The third thing we might refer to by way of introduction is what we might call a crisis of adult education. Crisis of adult education, with it becoming very marginal. But in fact, we are going to suggest, I think, in our dialogue today that it may be central to negotiating our way out of the multiple crises that we are facing. And what we've been doing in the series, as Sharon and Ian mentioned, I think we've been researching, and we are a research circle, the present, past, and the imagined futures of what we might call, picking up on your point about reductive approaches to adult education, Sharon, life-affirming, inclusive experiments in democratic education. So we started last time in this series with Cork and learning neighborhoods, a great stress on neighborhoods, not just cities, but what was happening at a local neighborhood level. And today we're looking at a project called the Adult Learning Project in Gorgie Dalry, a past experiment, if you like, in participative democracy. And as Colin and Jerry's book so aptly was titled, Living Adult Education in a Working Class District of Edinburgh. So in a sense, it's not just Colin and me who are dialoguing, we're also dialoguing with a whole host of co-workers and, of course, Paulo Freire. Some questions we might want to consider as a whole group. What really does lie at the heart of a living participative democracy and adult education? Easy to ask the question, but I guess the answer, Paulo Freire would probably say much the same, is quite complex. Crucially, how best to deal with conflict, disagreement, and difference, and nurture good enough dialogue. And how can Paulo Freire and experiences in a Freirean-inspired project or experiment in participative democracy and democratic education how can all that help us to think more widely about where resources of hope might lie in our struggles? So I really am delighted, Colin, to be kind of dialoguing again. We've known each other for a long time, and you've been kind of in a dialogue with Paulo Freire longer than I have, but it's your work that has inspired me to take renewed interest in Paulo Freire. It goes back a long way, but one place to start is the fact you were teaching Freire, weren't you?
I was, yeah. I first came across Paulo Freire's work in the year 1975-76, and when I found it, I was astonished by it. I think that's the best word, astonished, riveted by it. And I read as much as I could get, and because Freire's work is not easy, I would often go back to the page I just turned and read it again, so that I was thinking clearly, because he demands that you think clearly. I've spent my entire life in community action, I think, of one sort or another, and I'm going to have to be careful not to use this as a platform simply for my own thoughts and wishes and exasperation, which I feel very intensely. So I do want to start by looking at Freire's work. When I was working in Casimir with my wife Jerry as an unpaid community activist, we did lots and lots of all sorts of things. And then I did a one-year course in Edinburgh and got the job of tutor organizer with the WEA, the only tutor organizer, the WEA in Southeast Scotland. And so that coincided with my discovery of Paulo Freire's books and his ideas and his view of practice. Very important. So, cut a long story short, I think I taught 3 or possibly 4 courses on Freire. The first one was simply a pedagogy of press reading group. The second one, and I think probably the most influential, was called Community Action and the Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Now, community action was an in-word then, but it was an in-word because there was tons of it going on throughout Britain, as well as throughout Scotland. So that course consisted of a lot of community education workers, mainly from Edinburgh, and also some community education managers and social workers and community development workers. So that was a very exciting course, and it was on that course that 2 of the course members, not myself, decided to apply for a grant to implement Freire's ideas in Edinburgh. So the Adult Learning Project, well, that application was successful. The Adult Learning Project was launched in September 1979 in Gorgie do Rye, an inner city area in Edinburgh. And it ran, you may say that the last 5, 7, even 10 years have trickled rather than ran. Nevertheless, it effectively ran for 14 years. And it was, you're right, you, Linden, are right to call it an experiment in participatory or participative democracy. And the interesting coincidence is this, that ALP started in September 79, so did the government of Margaret Thatcher, the right-wing Conservative government of Margaret Thatcher. And I often wish, and I see my friend Ian Martin's name is shot up in front of me just now. That's good. Hello, Ian. I'm sure you're listening. If only the Labour Party had responded to Margaret Thatcher the way ALP did, the way the Adult Learning Project did, we would be in a very different place in Britain today. We wouldn't be stuck with another right-wing Conservative government 40 years later. So that's probably enough of my threatening. Go on, Linda.
Colin, I mean, I was fortunate to work in Edinburgh. In fact, we worked together on 1 or 2 things, and I lived in a place called Harrison Park, Harrison Gardens, which overlooks, not far away anyway, from Gorgie do Rye. Yeah. And I'm very familiar with the shop where the Adult Learning Project was based. Just take us into the beating heart of the project. What was going on? What did lie at its heart? What were people trying to do?
Yeah, well, I don't think that Fraser Patrick has arrived yet. He may not be able to come. because he was the manager of it, and he was a great manager. He did very well. The three workers were Stan Reeves, Jerry Kirkwood, my wife Jerry, and Fiona McCall, who's here today. Hello again, Fiona. I'm so glad you are able to be here. And the interesting thing, and I can't remember who made this decision, but it was the right decision. We had a choice. We felt we had a choice. Either we get to know the area by contacting local schools, local churches, local workplaces, or we knock doors. And we opted for the second, exclusively for the second. And that, I think that was a wonderful and creative decision. So 400 doors, according to the Outbook, were knocked by Fiona, by Stan, and by Jerry. And that means that right from the very start, the Alp workers were on the doorstep listening to ordinary people who lived in ordinary housing. Because we're talking about ordinary 19th century tenements, okay? And they were literally in dialogue with the people of Gorgie Darai in an ordinary way. And they were recording what people said to them. Now, that, of course, is fundamental to Freire's approach to adult education, that he really is genuinely interested in what ordinary people say. So one of the main question that, in a sense, was being asked was on those doorsteps, would you like to join us and with us investigate together the life you guys live in living in Gorgie Darai?
Could we just stop at the doorstep for a moment, because there's so much complexity already, because those doorstep encounters weren't always easy. I think in Living Adult Education, one of the things I like about the book is it's quite honest and quite reflexive. So who are you? A religious group was one example. Another person responded by saying, no, we don't want any education. I don't want any, but go and educate the neighbors. So it was really kind of difficult, challenging stuff. And a lot of women were involved. So take us through what happens then in terms of the development of ALP.
Well, at one level, the aim of all that door knocking was to get a group Freire calls co-investigators. And out of all that work, initially 12 people volunteered to become co-investigators. 3 of them were young mothers, 2 of them were young single women with jobs, 2 older women. So you see that there was a predominance in the volunteers of women, young and old. And I think that was tremendous. That was really great. And then 2 men, one of them working, one who was unemployed. Now these really became those folk became the avant-garde of ALP, and they were not your usual bunch of people leading the schools or people leading the churches or people in senior shop stewards in the workplaces.
So this is where I think one of the challenges comes, Colin. Some people in reading Freire find him very jargon-ridden and quite difficult. So can you take us a little bit into things like identifying generative themes and codifications? What exactly are we talking about here?
Well, that's right. First of all, can I just make a single utterance about Freire's language? Freire was not a trendy who wanted to simplify English or Portuguese right down to 1 or 2 syllable words. Not at all. He would use big words, Latinate words, and simple words. And I think that's wonderful because he was not a generator of blah, not at all. Every single page, every single sentence of Paulo Freire demands attention and demands thinking. And I think that's true of ALP. Let's take the word codification. What he meant by that, and what he explains, is that a codification is a representation of an existentially significant situation. Now, there's 5 Latin-based words for a start. The representation of an existentially significant situation and there was a big debate in Alp. Which way should we go? Should we do drawings? Because they had some very good artists who could make very good drawings of life in Gorgie del Rye, or photographs. And luckily, Stan was a good photographer, a trained photographer, and we finally opted mainly for photographs. And I think that was super. I don't know whether you want to show some of those just now.
Let's go. Let's just give an illustration of the 4 codifications. I think
that would be helpful.
Ian or Sharon is going to bring them up for us. Or Richard, maybe.
Anybody able to do that?
Yeah, if you bear with me, I should be able to do it. Hold on a sec.
Yeah. You want me to just go on, Richard? Go on talking.
I think Sharon's doing it for you.
Great.
There we go. There we go, Colin. So what are we looking at here?
Well, what we have here on the right there, that chap is Stan Reeves. Okay, a wonderful, wonderful worker who worked for Alp for 40 years. And he's still my pal, and I'm hoping to go out with him tonight. And what he's pointing to there is a codification. And it's a picture, not this picture here, but the next one we'll see. This is a group of people who are co-investigators who have volunteered to take part in the work.
Here's the next picture. Here's the next picture.
And hang on a minute, I want to go back to the first one if I can. Thank you. And Stan is saying, look, here's a codification. It's a representation of a significant situation. And this significant situation is a little family. And so there are 3 levels of questioning that Freire favoured. One is descriptive. The second is, oh God, I've forgotten the bloody word, actually. Descriptive, my goodness.
We'll come back, Colin. Come back. Carry on.
Come back. First descriptive, then emotional and relational, and thirdly, interpretative and analytical. So this is these guys learning how to do decoding of a codification. Okay, let's go on to the next picture. Can we go back to the second picture? Right, lovely. This was a picture which was used to focus on what goes on in family life today. Here's a young mother, 3 children, maybe a 6-year-old, 4-year-old, and a baby. And here is the dad on the left. And, you know, it's quite apparent that the dad is somewhat disconnected, not entirely. Now, I don't want to start doing decoding, okay? So could we look now at the 3rd image? This is a picture of mainly mothers and grannies waiting for children to get out of the local primary school, okay? And it's very interesting that there's a barrier of, you know, Greek spears, as it were, or Roman spears, to keep them out. And they're all obeying that, except for one person who we knew was a childminder. And she obviously didn't give a toss about whether she was supposed to stand outside or not. So, and then finally, if we could look at the last picture, we only selected 4. This is a picture of men in the pub after work. And of course, there isn't any work like that, which there was then in 1979. There isn't any work like that in that area of Edinburgh at all. Okay, thanks, Linden.
So just to be clear, so we have these intensive interviews with people. People's themes are generated. They're then codified, in this case by photographs, or they can be done by drawing and other things, poetry, etc.
That's right, yeah.
And then these begin to be used in various learning groups. Now, what I understand is out of the initial investigations and the codifications and what you called, and I'm conscious we're rushing over this a little bit, but
yeah, okay.
There we go. Half an hour is the time we've got in Gorgie del Rye. There were 3 learning programs. So these are coming right from the bottom up, as it were.
Yeah.
3 learning programs were developed. The family today.
Family today.
You and the school, and on being Scottish. Can you just say something quickly about those? The next stage of the work.
I think that was inspiring. The choice of those 3 and the building of learning programs around those 3 was absolutely right. I think Fiona and Stan and Jerry got it right with the advice of their manager Fraser and Mike Rosendale. They got it right, and these generated enormous popular interest because the co-investigation had put its finger on three vitally important themes, if you like, of Scottish life at that time, which continued and continue even now to be terribly important. The next phase that came after that, jumping quickly over it, is that the next investigation was entitled Health and Wellbeing. The team felt that this was the next big issue, and that produced two learning programs, one called Health on the Dole and the other called Women and Wellbeing. And again, that kind of signaled two very important themes for ALP, the life of ALP, which continued. Okay, and I want to say this word, if I may, Linden, about how we approached the building of learning programs, how they approached the building of learning programs. That they did approach experts, lots of experts, sociologists, health experts, and so on, but they didn't give a platform to experts. Okay, the ALP wanted to reverse the traditional sequence where this very important, knowledgeable person from the university stood on a dais and lectured for an hour. And then people were permitted to ask questions. I was at such a meeting the other day, this week. We reversed it and we said, let's start with the people themselves saying their own word. That was the phrase that I adopted, say your own word, and then follow that up. Once you get a contribution from everybody that wants to contribute, follow it up with a presentation by the expert or the invited resource person. Then a dialogue happens. Now that is an enactment of something that's very important to Freire, that education is about learner-teachers meeting teacher-learners, democratizing education in a fundamental way, but not in a gestural way. It's substantive, it's meaningful. Do you want to pick up from there, Linden?
Yes. So what we're saying here, this is in contradistinction to a banking approach.
Yeah.
Or the feeding approach to learning. I think Sartre call it philosophy alimentaire, and I'll reverse that. So say your own word, contributions by group members, presentation then by experts or invited resource people who had been encouraged to attune themselves
to the
detail of some of the interview material, and then dialogue from that. Now, as I understand it, Colin, and again, this is one of the things I like in the book, because what we struggle with, what troubles us sometimes is important as what works well. Dialogue wasn't always easy. In a sense, what the project underlined was that dialogue and the capacity to dialogue one with another has to be learned. And that is not something that comes automatically for racial, for gendered, for all sorts of educational reasons. And a later phase of the ALP project involved local people dialoguing with refugees and people from diverse cultures. Again, that wasn't easy.
Yeah, well, that's true. But I think there's a worry in Britain as a whole, really, a collective worry that if you let ordinary people in on the act, they'll riot and wreck the place. And sometimes that has happened, usually because of repression from above, but not always. About 15 years ago, we had a new political party called Scottish Socialist Party, which was unfortunately led by a guy who shouldn't have been there, in my view. And he was encouraging people to be violent. So, of course, was Arthur Scargill. So were certain of the militant tendency. Now, that is really not very helpful. And I think that Freire's approach is actually close to non-violent. It's not, I would say he wouldn't have said, I'm a pacifist out and out, but he goes in that direction. Dialogue is difficult. And I don't know if you want to say a bit about Martin Buber's view on dialogue.
Well, I think we need to be conscious of the time as well. Well, Colin, I'm aware as well people might begin to feel slightly frustrated we're rushing over things, but that's as it is. What lies at the heart of Freire, I think, is the question I want to move on to here.
Right.
And I want to pick up on that in relation to Freire drawing on the Jewish Austrian theologian Martin Buber.
Yep.
And I, thou. This strikes me as incredibly important, and something which progressives and some on the left have neglected. It's not I, thou, it's I, you, listen, or I, it. It is something to do with a fundamental respect, even a sense which is an unpopular thing perhaps to say in some secular company, that, you know, the glimpse of the divine in the other, there's a thou with you. Can you just say quickly what that I, thou quality is and how it comes to be realized?
Could I spell out very briefly, using Freire's own words, what he says about this towards the end of Pedagogy of the Oppressed? He says there is a dialogical I and thou. The thou calls forth the I of the other, and the I calls forth the thou of you, or of me, if you like. So there's a thou and an I and an I and a thou. So the thou calls up, summons an I, and the I summons a thou. So in the end, there are two thous and two I's. Now that is a fundamental orientation to living, to the whole of living, to the whole of our task in our 70 or 75 years that we have to be on this planet. It's not a fighting orientation, it's a dialogical orientation, and it's the most important thing of all.
So we're bringing this, again, it's fundamental in my reading of Freire and Buber, certainly. We're not bringing some kind of set of techniques to bear. We're bringing our whole humanity to bear, and the sense of the humanity of the other. I think this is quite a fundamental point. Somebody asked in one of our seminars some time ago, well, why can't we just produce a set of techniques for good pedagogy? This is not what Freire offers, I think. Okay, well, can I just say something briefly about Martin Buber that Freire draws on a lot, on the spirit of good community. Buber was someone, he looked back to Tonne's Gemeinschaft, I think at the beginning of the 20th century, like many people. He was concerned, anxiety-ridden by the fragmentation of what he saw as a capitalist society. He looked back to what he thought were good communities in the past, and he used as examples of that medieval guilds, the early kibbutzim, the aspects of the Paris Commune, and even, and this may surprise some people, some of the early Soviets. Listen to what Martin Buber said, and remember that Freire and Buber, I think, were in dialogue. A real community must consist of people because they're comrades, have mutual access to one another, creating elective affinities as comrades, not being told by some central authority how to do things. So I think we can detect in Buber, if you like, to be provocative, anarchist leanings and features, working things out in community at a local level. The other point I want to mention, because then we'll have to move on, Colin, is liberation theology. You know that I've written about this. I'm concerned by the kind of writing out of liberation theology from some Western accounts of Freire and his work. I mean, Freire would be appalled. Freire was a liberation theologist and described himself as a liberation theologist. And if you read some of his work and read some of the interpretations of his work, and I strongly recommend Owen Leopando's recent work on Freire. Freire was talking a language of the spirit, incarnating amongst the poorest and the oppressed. He talked of transcendence in the ordinary, not in parliaments or palaces. And he talked for linking back to I, thou, I think, of enunciation being, I think, more fundamental than denunciation. So love is more important than criticality. That the spirit needs to draw a person out. They need to feel part of a community, and then they can find their voice to be critical and to be critical towards those who oppress them. And I think I want to make the comment, Colin, if you don't mind, that these religious ideas are difficult to talk about in largely secular progressive circles. Freire himself thought the real enemy was secular or religious fundamentalism. So do you quickly want to come back, and then we need to finish?
Yep, I agree with that. And if you look, and we don't have time to do it now, if you look at the activity, the action outcomes from lots of ALP's work, you see that spirit of practical love. I think you saw it in the learning group that Stan was teaching there, if you like, how animated and happy they were to be engaging. But also in the work that Fiona McCall did with the writer's workshop in Gorgie Dorrai. The writer's workshop in Gorgie Dorrai was terrific, and it consisted mostly of men, but they weren't out for a punch-up, not at all. They were talking to each other and smiling at each other, and it wasn't a false smile either. It was affection and generativity in the writer's workshop, and that's true of lots of other of the activities that
we're going to have to I can feel the time as the latest tyrant in this. So what do we take from these experiences? I think it feels to me ALP was a living adult education and an experiment in participative democracy, reminding me, Sharon, of Raymond Williams, what we might call the structure of democratic feeling. It's my play on Williams, but I think it works. Reminds me of Richard Henry Tawney and those learning groups as incarnations of the kingdom. And as with Buber, with Williams, with Tawney and Freire, I think there's a fundamental suspicion of the idea of the centers know best. And what I think is inspiring for our work, and Buber reminds us, these struggles to invigorate the local and to give spaces in which local people can begin to determine in dialogue, in community, one with another, how they want their lives to live. As Buber points out, this goes back centuries. So to finish on a Raymond Williams note, we're part of a long revolution, a long experiment in democratic and education. And I find that's an inspiring idea.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. That was brilliant. Both of you really enjoyed that. I hope others did as well. Lots to think about there, and I hope that will stimulate the discussion as we go into the breakout rooms.